Okay, so far we've looked at simple arithmetic calculations, summing, subtracting, dividing and multiplying. In this section we're going to look at functions. We're going to use an example function, in this case sum, one of the most common and useful functions within Excel, and we're also going to talk a little bit about the structure of a function and how we use them and how they're put together. So in the previous examples we have been adding and subtracting by specifying either a constant, a number, directly into the cell, or by connecting a cell reference. But often when we're using Excel we'll have situations where we need to add a very large number of references together. Here I have a units column and a total sales column. It is probable that I might want to know what the total of all those sales are in the entire column, or the total of all the units for that matter. So one approach would be to open my formula function or tell Excel that I want to perform a calculation by using the equal sign. And then I could manually type in the first number, 284.05 plus 249.50. But doing this I'm already getting quite bored and frustrated. So there's got to be a slightly easier way. Well, we could try cell references. I could type my equals to tell Excel I'm going into formula mode, and then I could click on the cell that I'm interested in, hence creating a cell reference. Excel now knows that the first value to add is G6 because I've clicked on it. I can then press sum and click on another cell. Now it knows to sum G6 to G7. And I can continue to move through the list, adding a plus, adding a number, adding a plus, adding a number, adding a plus, etc. And I'm running out of breath. So this is one option, and it works for my list because I only have about 10 or 11 rows. But imagine if this list was 1,000 rows. I certainly wouldn't want to be sitting here all day plussing and clicking and plussing and clicking. So we need a function. A function is effectively a shortcut to perform a more complicated calculation. So I'm going to simply press escape to cancel what I've written into this cell and return to a normal blank cell. And instead of doing all my plussing cell by cell, I'm going to use the sum function. So I've briefly described the function a second ago. Let's understand it a bit more. As I type sum, you will automatically see that Excel gives me a list of sum functions, anything that has sum in its name. There are all kinds of different flavors, but the one I'm interested in is just basic vanilla sum. So I type sum, and then I open my brackets to tell the sum function I want to feed it some parameters. So the parameters are the things that you give to your function to tell it to calculate it. In this situation, I want it to calculate a column of numbers. I can start by adding the first parameter and clicking on that top cell. We have now entered one parameter. I can then type a comma and move on to the second parameter. You will see in the tooltip it's given a description to tell you what that parameter is. In this case the parameters are very, very simple. They are simply numbers, and we're adding together multiple numbers. So I can then add my comma, click into the next cell, add a comma, click into my next cell, etc. The only problem is this is not much easier than my previous method where I simply added cells together. So I want a more shorthand way of doing it. Well, the sum function is a little bit clever, and I don't have to feed it individual values. I can instead select an entire range, and the sum function will automatically know that I want to perform a sum on all cells within the selected area. So at this point I've simply selected the entire cells column containing the data that I want to add together. I've given it all of the parameters it needs, and I can simply close the function by adding another bracket. I've now finished the function. I close the bracket and hit enter to tell Excel that I want to see the value I want it to perform the calculation. And here I have a number, and we can see it has been calculated. Now at this stage you can just take my word for it that the calculation has been performed correctly, or we can use another little calculation shortcut available within Excel. And that is to highlight the data, and simply by selecting the data, Excel will give me some additional information found here in what they call the status bar. It's already telling me the sum of the selected range is 1831.79, which is exactly the same result as my formula. And as you go through Excel and you start to use functions more and more, this status bar information will be very helpful in double checking that your formulas are working correctly. Okay, so we have a functioning formula. Now, the sum function allows multiple parameters. So I can feed it one range or one single number, and then add a comma, and then add another range or another number. So in my one sum function, I could sum together all of my sales and all of my sales tax. I simply press enter and view the result. Again, if I want to double check my formula, I select the entire range, and we can see that the sum corresponds, 2014 versus 2014. Let's understand something else about my function. My function can be written simply just as I have entered the data by knowing the syntax of the formula. I can complete the parameters where they need to be in the function. But another way to achieve the same result is to use this effects button. This is effectively a kind of formula editor. So let me click on the FX button and see what happens. Excel automatically recognizes the formula and breaks up the different parameters into individual sections. So it's telling me number 1, which is the first parameter, is being fed this cell reference G6, G14, and the second parameter is being fed H6, H14. And it is using both of those numbers and being calculated. You may have noticed when I clicked on to the next row, Excel automatically added a new blank area for me to fill in. So from here, I can in fact add more information. Within this helper, or this formula wizard if you like, I can go and find more columns, more information to add. I'll simply click on this blue and red button here, find another column of interest, say units, tell Excel that I'm finished by clicking the button again, and I have now added a new range to my sum function. I can now click OK, and the formula is updated. But there's a number of other handy features within this formula, this FX formula builder. Let's click on it again, and we can see that within my sum, I have the number 1, number 2, number 3. But also within number 1, it is giving me a description of the parameter. It's telling me that number 1, I can add number 1, number 2, as many parameters as I want, up to 255. It's telling me all accept logical values, texts are ignored in cells, included of type as argument. You will find this helpful information about all the different functions we look at throughout the course. And it's useful to know that we can find these descriptions here. It's also useful to know that we have this help on this function hyperlink. So from within the function that I'm working with, I can simply click on the link and Excel will load some relevant help information. Here we see the full Excel article on the sum function. It has a description of the syntax, various remarks, and other information. This help file will normally tell you pretty much everything you need to know about an Excel function. So if you're feeling unfamiliar with a function, or it's a function that you haven't used for a little while, you can use this method to access specific Excel help on the function that you're working with. But normally you won't even need to load the help file. Simply reminding yourself of how the parameters are used by reading these descriptions here will be enough to steer you in the right direction. So this has been our introduction to both the sum function and functions in themselves. We may discover some more tips and tricks as we move through the video series, but this is a good solid grounding for getting started. So we've looked at the effects button or the formula builder in the context of a function that we already understand, and that is the sum function. But we can use the formula builder to build a new function from scratch. If I simply enter my cell, press an equals, and then press the effects button, Excel will load the insert function menu. And from this point, I can simply search through the list of functions to find one that is appropriate to what I want to do. Right here, I can see there is a sum and an average, two very useful functions. Perhaps I want to look for the maximum number in a selection of cells. I can actually see the maximum function here, but alternatively, I could simply type max or maximum into my search function, click go, and Excel will find for me maximum related functions. And here I can see I have the function max and a few other variations, dmax and other things. So using this methodology, it's very easy to find new functions. I'm going to keep it simple and go back to my sum function. There it is. I can simply double click on the word sum and my formula is initiated, and it's already asking me for the first argument. If I'm happy with what I've got, I can just press OK, or I might want to add other information. So using this methodology, I didn't actually have to type a single thing. The formula was built absolutely 100% by Excel and the formula builder. We will be looking at functions in more detail throughout the video series, but this is our introduction to the sum function and functions in general.